Right. So, what we are discussing in reference to this, uh, like we need to started with about the product analysis, right? So, whenever we are working on creating a test plan, all that. So, first thing, what is that we did is to analyze product or a project. That's what we did. After that, we have discussed even about designing the test strategy. Followed by test strategy, we have discussed even about defining the objectives of the testing, what is that are we performing. So followed by this, we have discussed even about establishing the test criteria, right? So what criteria to be followed in reference to the testing we do, right? So either it can be suspension criteria or exit criteria, all that. So followed by this, even we discussed even about planning resource allocation, followed by planning uh, setup of test environment, right? So determining the test schedule estimation. All these things we have discussed in the previous session. The last one, but of course it's not least. Today we are discussing about establishing test deliverables. So what exactly the test deliverables are all about and why are these deliverables important? So if we understand whenever we are working on test deliverables, these test deliverables are nothing but the one which is relating to the project part, because whatever the project deliverables are we expecting, the same thing will be converted as a test deliverable, right? So because both are one the same. So understanding and establishing test deliverables is one of the key and important aspect we need to understand, because we need to uh, as far as the test deliverables itself is concerned, wherein we have to list up the documents, the kind of tools, right? So at the same time, the kind of testing activities which are involved and related to the project, right? So all these things has to be taken into consideration. So whenever we are talking about test deliverables means what is the final conclusion or final testing deliverable we are expecting, right? So that has to be identified and that has to be mentioned, because if you have not mentioned about the test deliverable, what finally conclusion we have to come, right? So we have to come with, right? So we may not have clarity over that. So, excuse me. So to get that clarity and all, it's always important for us to establish test deliverables, whatever is required, all that. So when it comes to the uh, test deliverables itself is concerned, these test deliverables, we need to understand this in three levels. One is about before, and second, during and after testing. Because so before the testing, whatever we are going to start, we must be knowing about the test deliverables, so that team will be knowing about what is the targeted area of testing we have to reach so far. Okay, this is where generally test deliverables and all everything were required for us before we are going to start the testing, etc. Second, about during. During means whenever you are working on the testing part, during the phase of testing, what is that are we going to do and all. So what is that final deliverables we wants to achieve? This is where generally during come into picture. During means at the time of performance testing. And we have to make sure no one has violated, no one has cross violated what is that we wants to achieve so far. Because initially what happened whenever we are working on testing, initially whatever the desired results we want to achieve and whatever the objectives we want to achieve in reference to the testing will be identified and accepted by the team. But when it comes to the reality, sometimes that deviates, because due to the influence relating to other functionalities whatever we are performing, there are possibilities sometimes these are all will be deviated in regular intervals, which we have to be focused more on. So it is always important for us to understand about the test deliverables and all everything. So first of all, before what is that are we going to start? Before you're going to start the testing, we must be knowing about the deliverables. The same thing must be carried at the time of during state. So once the during state, the next is done state. Done states means once the work is completed, after that, what is the testing we have to be performed. So these are the areas which we have to be focused whenever we are going to create and as well as establishing test deliverables and all. These are the aspects we need to consider whenever we are working on it. Now, whenever we want to know about the test deliverables, there is some documentation which has to be prepared as far as the manual process itself is concerned. Right, let me write down here. Deliverables. No, sorry, documentation. In reference to the manual part, I'm saying this, okay? Documentation required before the testing starts. As part of deliverables. As follows. Right, so as follows. The first one, we must be knowing about test plan. First one, we must be knowing about test plan. So after test plan, the next is test design. Okay, these are the two things. Now, when it comes to the documentation part, we need to consider two things. One is about test plan, second is a test design. Test plan, nothing but whatever the testing we want to perform, means the kind of activities which are required for us to perform as far as the test planning itself is concerned. This document is essentially required, right? So that is what we are doing now all this time. Next, about test design. Test design means how to perform testing, right? So because there is a structure normally we follow. What comes next? What comes next? There is a proper design. It is always required for the testing team to understand and to perform the activities, which is essentially required whenever we are working on the test deliverables, all that stuff. So hence, whenever we want to establish testing deliverables, then we are trying to understand these test deliverables by segregating into three parts. One is before, during, and after. So before you are going to start the testing team or quality analyst team should have a knowledge as well as should have the documentation relating to test planning and test design, because test planning gives you a clear understanding over so how and what generally are we going to plan and how we have to be moved further. This is where general test planning come into picture. So once the test planning is done, the next is test design. Test design means what are the designs to be made in reference to the testing, what is that we are performing. Either it can be features level, right? It can be functional or non-functional level, or is this test design something relating to the security aspects of the project? All these things we have to be known with. This is where generally test designs and all everything come into picture. So these are the two things which we have to be considered whenever we are preparing the documentation, especially whenever we are working on test deliverables. These are the documentation or these are the documents which are essentially required. Next one, documentation required during testing as part of deliverables as follows, right? So what are the documentation which has to be focused more? Now, whenever we are working on, yeah. So whenever we are working on this documentation part, whenever we are working on this documentation, especially at the time of yes. right? So at the time of testing, whatever the deliverables, whenever we are working on the deliverables, so the kind of documentation, whatever is required during the testing part, majorly focuses on the test scripts. Okay, first point. So it's not only about the test scripts, we must be knowing about the test data also. Test data is required. At the same time, error and execution logs. Error and execution logs. So these are the aspects we need to consider whenever we are working on the documentation during the testing comes into picture. Now, because if you remember in the beginning of the sessions when I started about quality analysis, so as far as the manual testing is concerned, I have told you there are different documents we prepare, right? So test plan, right? So test cases, all these things I mentioned you. As part of that, the one of the key and prominent thing we have to be focused more about the test scripts, right? So what exactly scripts are all about, right? So why scripting is required and what are the test scripts we have to be focused more on. Now, whenever we are trying to understand scripting for any of the project, whatever the aspects we are considering, whenever you are working on the test cases, all that is what we have to be seen with. Now, let's say, for example, for what purpose test case we are preparing. Test case is a document we are preparing for the benefit of the people will be knowing about what exactly this is all about and why this can be performed, right? So this is where generally we comes under test cases on that. But now, when it comes to the test scripting and all, test scripting majorly focuses on few elements, focuses on the amount of scenario, what is that we are going to perform. Because scenario of the testing functionality, whatever we have taken into consideration is what generally comes under the test scripting part. So test scripting, which clearly details you the line by line, what I can say, line by line description, right? Wherein description of the information, what is to be given. Let's say, for example, we are creating a login page, right? So what are line by line here, right? So you must be having login, user ID, password, two different fields you required. So one is to type user ID and second is to type password. After that, you require a submit button. You must require a cancel button, wherein in top right, you may be needed something like home button or back button, right? So all these things will be there in it, right? So each and every line by line description, which is containing to a particular testing, whatever are we going to perform, that will be written in a form of test scripting. This is where generally test scriptings and all everything is required. So whenever we are trying to write this test scripts and all, it is majorly focusing on the system transactions, majorly which should be performed for us to validate the kind of application, what is that we are working on at the time of testing whenever we are performing it. Because we have to list out all the test scripts part, right? So because we have to list out each and every step, whichever is required for a particular functionality we are developing. So we need to mention each and every stepwise procedure of the testing, which is essentially required. So that what happen advantage is that, so whenever you are going to write engine everything, right? So let's say that there is a button for cancel, which was mentioned by the customer, which was not mentioned, unfortunately, by the development team. So what will happen now? Let's say, for example, whenever assume that we have not identified this, for example, right? So assume that we have not identified this. What happened whenever the particular page is given for a customer to use whenever they start working, right? So whenever they are giving user ID password at the time, if they want to cancel the transaction or if they want to cancel the process of login and all everything, so unfortunately they don't see anything of that kind, right? So because there is only one button where we call it as submit, right? You can see only submit button, you don't see any cancel button. So each and every minute line of description, whatever is essentially required for a particular functionality, that has to be mentioned. This is where generally test scripts and all everything come into picture. Because whenever we are working on, because why I'll tell you the reason behind this. One more reason about descriptions. Why? Because you could ask me one thing, Raj, why do we detail all this? Because don't you think developer or people who are working on the functionality and all, don't you think that they don't know anything about all this? It's not the case, because end of the day, whenever a person has created a user interface design page or something like that, so for example, login page was created. End of the day, who has to do the testing? Testing people has to perform the testing using some automation tools, something like Selenium, right? So all that stuff is what we have to use it. So whenever we are working on these tools, it is always important for us to know and as well as to understand about how the login page should looks like, and what are the different fields which are required on the particular login page. So whenever there is an automation testing they are using, testing team doing, so they have to know about each and every line of description, whatever is required on the particular page. Okay, so if you don't have all these, what will happen? Even though they are working on testing using automation tool, the accuracy is not 100%, right? So it may go up to 80% or it may go up to 70% and it stop, because there is no detailed description of the functionality, whichever must be presented finally. So if it was not the case, there is a possibility of, uh, I don't say misunderstanding, there is a possibility of uh, there is a possibility of I don't say failure, ignorance. There is a possibilities of ignorance by the team, which they were supposed to perform was not done. Why? Because there is no cancel button or something like as such, which was not written. As an example, I'm giving this. So these are the problems which we may arise. For example, we are giving some password and all, right? So at the same time, when we have given the password, we need to click on OK, submit button, cancel button. Either it can be new registration. Sometimes in below to the page, if you see, there will be an option. For example, if we are working on Gmail, whenever you are logging into Gmail account or something, if we see here, there will be an option for new registration if anybody wants to be a new user. So each and every minute level line to line descriptions are essentially required. This is where generally test scripting is required. The reason why, if you have seen closely, whenever I'm going to explain you about tested deliverables and all, test scripting and all, everything is required during the testing part, right? Not before testing, because before testing means before testing you don't have any need as such. But while people are working on testing, while they are doing coding and all everything for a particular functionalities and all, team should be knowing about what are the lines and what are the each and every fields which are required for us to mention. All these things and all should be known to the team well in advance. Hence, it is always important for us to know. So why and what, for what purpose this are all is required and all everything is what we have to be known with. So that is the reason why whenever we are working on application development, whenever we are working on testing in reference to the tested deliverables itself is concerned, it is always important for us to know about test scripts which are essentially required. Because unless until if we don't have test scripting and test scripting, right? So if you don't have proper test scripting, whatever is required, so it is difficult for if it is difficult for it automation testing, especially because after manual process was selected, automation process come into picture by automation testing come into picture by the testing team. So they have to be known each and every aspect which is essentially required when they are working on. So for that reason, whenever we are working on deliverables which are required during the testing, as far as the documentation is concerned, the first thing what is that we have to be considered is about test scripts. This is point number one. So once the test scripts, the next is test data. Test data means what kind of data is required whenever we are working on the application. Because this test data can be anything, right? So for example, let's say the point of sale system we have taken, right? So in this point of sale system, for what purpose? This is an application, this is a billing system which is exclusively used for person whoever has bought some products. So when it comes to the data, when it comes to the data of the one which they have to be tested, what is that they have to do the testing data? Data testing of the customer records. Means either the customer did for name, or it can be gender, right? It can be contact number or mailing address, right? So it can be their contact number, right? It correlates the kind of ID whatever we have given, right? So for example, someone has bought the products in a particular retail store, right? So if, for example, if he's a member, automatically there will be an customer ID number will be generated, which is an auto ID number, which will be generated in the system itself, by the system itself, because that is nothing to do with manual operation. So there is a data is required. So it depends on the kind of project we are working on, test data is required, because some data is something static, right? Where you don't require to make any kind of changes into the existing one. Let's say, for example, name of the person, gender, right? So there are few things which are static whenever we are working on the data. And some are dynamic. What are dynamic? Let's say person, for example, some person has given a contact person, one contact number was given by the customer. After maybe after few months or a year or so, assume that the person has changed his contact number, right? So that can be changed. Even mailing address, even email, right? So all these things can be changed. The reason why whenever we are working on the data part, so this data we can understand in two ways. One is about manual static data, and second is a dynamic data. Static data means where whatever the data we have taken is completely static, right? So you don't require to do any changes, and it is not possible for us to make changes also, because for example, a person, we have given a customer ID number for a person, customer ID number will be given based on his name, followed by the contact details, etc., etc., for a particular person. So once the customer ID number is generated on a particular person, so it is not possible for us to do any changes in terms of the name, especially name and all everything, are not possible for us to change, because whatever the tracking details, everything will be mentioned on that. On that, it can be, right. So for example, contact number or contact mail address or email, right. So this can be changed because that is depends on. What we call that is depends on the project to project. These are all will be varied, right? So this is where whenever we are working on testing data and all that, so this is also one of the key and prominent thing we have to be considered, because during the testing, whenever we are working on this data will be useful to us, because the data of the customer can be taken. So it's not only customer data, even person who is operating the system at the time of billing, because employee data, I mean to say employee data, irrespective of the number, it can be, right. It can be a minimum number or it can be a maximum number. So number is not a parameter to be handled here. So more than the number, it is always important what kind of data are we taking, right? Either it can be contact details, or it can be mailing address, it can be name, it can be gender, right? It can be a customer data, it can be an employee data. At the same time, more importantly, if you have taken point of sale system and all, the data can be even inventory management also. Inventory. Inventory means the kind of goods which are available on a particular store. Again, this inventory will be classified, depends on the usage. For example, some on kitchen utensils and all everything, that product classification is different. For example, whenever we want to use for regular, maybe for bath soaps, right? So maybe shampoos, right? So that section is different. Maybe for kitchen appliances and all, that can be different. Maybe food grains are separate, right? So this is how generally the classification will be made in the inventory. So inventory is also considered and call it as a data. But when there is a classification do, of course, there are different techniques which will be used by the will be used by the inventory people, right? So as far as operations management itself is concerned, they will be using different tools, different techniques. Like for example, two-bin system, right? So ABC analysis, different techniques, using different techniques, and all this classification and product rating will be made by the operations team, right? So inventory management team and all, so they will be doing it. So based on the product classification will be made. So every product classification what they have made. So for that there will be some ID number will be generated and ID number will be given. So on that ID number, there will be some subproducts. Let's say for example, bath soaps we have taken. Again, these bath soaps may be classified based on the gender, right? It can be infants, it can be adults. Again, this is again based on the what I can say. This is based on the brand, right? So based on the brand, it can be categorized. So these are all something which are required whenever we are working on the test data. So it's not only about the scripting of the active scripting. What is that we are writing, right? So line by line description of the every activity, whichever is represented on the functionality. But it's also important for us to mention about the test data also, right? So whatever the data are we going to present over there. So that mentioning about the test data is also something essentially required whenever we are working on the test data, all that. So once the test data itself is concerned, the next is error and execution logs. Means whatever, let's say, because this is the document which normally we are considering at the time of testing, right? So not before, at the time of testing. So at the time of testing, always we know that there are some errors could arise sometimes. I'm not saying 100%, but sometimes there is a possibility. Either it can be minor or major errors might be arised whenever we are working on testing, either in the user interface level or in the coding business logic level, right? So either it can be security of the application, security testing, right? So or else it can be performance related. So there are some errors which will be identified. So whatever errors was identified during the testing process, at the same time execution also, because execution, what data we have executed and what was the errors we have identified, if any. If we have identified errors and all, that has to maintain the list. So list means log. Log means list. List of errors, whatever was presented as of now. All these things are comes under error and as well as execution logs and all everything are concerned. So whenever we want to establish the test deliverables during the testing, whenever it is working on, it is always important for us to know. It is always important for us to have a document, something relating to the test scripting part, which is required. At the same time, we must be knowing about what kind of data and how, what sort of data are we updating in the records and all. That will be taken into consideration because data is one of the core element we have to be focused. Next, we need to be focused on the errors and as well as the execution logs, right? So whatever the errors we have identified at the time of testing and whatever the execution we have made so far, all these things will be mentioned whenever we are working on during the phase of the project. So after during that, the next is about once the testing is completed, right? So the third one is about testing is completed. Documentation. Right. After testing completed as a part of deliverables as follows, right? So this is one. First one is before testing starts. Second one during the testing phase. The third one is after testing is done, right? So after testing is done, all that, right? So after testing. After testing, the kind of documentation, what is that has to be prepared here about the first one about the test results. Second is defect tracking report. Third one about release notes. Okay, three things will be there, right? So one is about test results. Second is defect tracking reports, and third is the release notes. So test results. Test results means what is that we have finally we have seen, because these test results may be of three different things I can say. One is pass, I'll show you in the test case document, you will see that. I'll show you. Whenever I show you the test case document, you will be pass. Second is fail. And third, sometimes I'm not saying this all the time because testing is a continuous process, right? So this is not the process. This is not the process something we will be doing only once, right? So because as long as we are working on the functionalities of the project, we do that, right? So it's a continuous thing. So hence, whenever we are going the test results and all, these test results will be classified into three parts. One is about pass, second is failed, third is hold. Pass means whatever the functionalities or the test functionalities we have taken were completed successfully. Means whatever, because there normally whenever we see the test results, there will be two results. One is expected results and second is an actual result. Okay. So expect result, what customer wants or what end user, whoever it is, what client, whatever it is, right? So what customer wants. What customer wants is called expected result. What is that customer is expecting there? Let's say, for example, login page. We have given user ID password, clicking on submit button or OK button. So for example, it's a Gmail kind of, right? Let's say what should happen? Immediately it has to show the inbox of the Gmail. This is the final result. It must be the final result. If we have performed everything perfectly, that must be the final result. This is where we call it as expected result stands for. So what is meant by actual result? What developer team executed? This is where we call it as actual result. Means what result was given by the development team. So if both are same, for example, right? If these two are same, we consider that the test condition is considered as pass. So when the both expected result as well as actual result are both are the same, consider as test condition is pass. If both are not same, for example, whatever the expected result and whatever the actual result, if there is any difference, difference can be a minimal percentage, difference can be major, whatever it is. End of the day, difference is a difference. This is where it comes as failed. Third one is called hold. Hold means due to few reasons, right? So of course, reasons will be mentioned over there, that is there, but I'm just mentioning it. So due to few reasons, we are keeping this particular functionality under hold, because I'll tell you the reason. Because of course this reason is very, I don't say minimal, but very rare we get, but usually because there are possibilities. So when, because for example there is a functionality which was given by the customer wherein we are working on it. After that, what customer has told you, customer wants to make some changes in the existing functionality what we have taken. So whenever we are making some existing changes in the existing functionalities, what will happen? Automatically that will be impacted on the particular functionality, what is that we are developing on, right? So whenever we are working on the functionality, sometimes customer wants to make some changes in the existing functionality. So even though the functionality was right, due to the changes was made in between, automatically the functionality will be considered as failed. But due to the reason of what customer has changed, if you require any additional information to perform or to proceed this further, till that extent, normally what is that we do is that we keep this on hold for any reason. This is optional reason. I don't say that this is something happens all the time. I don't say, because we don't wait till the testing phase, because if there is any changes to be made and all, normally all these will be doing in the test, in the development phase itself, we do that. So we don't wait till testing comes. Normally we don't do. But there are some phases sometimes where few reasons and all everything, these are all could also be taken place. That is the reason why when it comes to the test results and all, there could be some results which are pass, as whenever expected versus actual result are same, and some ones are failed, right? Failed means whatever the expected result we have identified, if it is not the one the same what customer is expecting, then it is called as uh, failed. And third one is about hold. Hold means you are keeping that hold on for some time, as we require some